My daughter-in-law stood up during the will reading and calmly announced I would no longer be part of my husband's $52 million estate. I didn't move, not even a blink. I had been there when Patrick lost the ability to walk, held his hand through every chemo session, fed him when his hands shook too much to hold a spoon. And now it was invisible. Rebecca delivered the news with the poise of a news anchor. No emotion, no hesitation, just a clean break. But then the attorney let out a chuckle, and I felt something shift in the room. What had Patrick kept from me? And why did I suddenly feel like he was trying to speak through the silence he left behind? After the funeral, I stood alone in the garden, watching the last of the cars drive off without so much as a goodbye. Paper cups half filled with cold coffee littered the grass. Folding chairs remained open, forgotten. The scent of lilac hung in the air, sharp and too clean. No one asked if I had a way home, not even Rebecca. She had orchestrated every second of the service. The flowers, the slideshow, the seating chart. Even the music had been cued like a theater production. It was pristine and heartless. Patrick would have hated it. He always said funerals should be messy, loud crying, bad punchlines, someone forgetting their coat. This one felt choreographed, like I was watching the closing scene of a play I hadn't been cast in. When I walked back inside, Rebecca was already clearing paperwork from the dining table. I coughed to let her know I was there, but she didn't lift her head. She just kept collecting files, smooth and mechanical. Then she said, without turning around, "We'll begin legal proceedings next week. Everything's arranged with the firm." Not once did she mention me. She didn't ask what I needed, didn't acknowledge I had spent 6 months sleeping upright in a hospital chair while she flew back and forth to conferences. I told myself she must be grieving or stressed. Maybe she just didn't know what to say. Then she handed me a small box with Patrick's name etched into the lid. "He asked me to give you this," she said. Inside was a silver tie clip. No note, no explanation, just the clip. Patrick had entire drawers filled with journals and handwritten letters. We used to leave each other sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. But this was all that was left for me. Not even one he wore often. Rebecca gave me a polite smile and walked out. Like that was enough. Like the story had ended. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea gone cold. And for the first time since Patrick died, I felt like I no longer belonged in the house we had built brick by brick. His scent still clung to the hallway. His slippers still sat by the back door. But it felt like my name had been softly erased from every corner. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe I was just tired. But something felt off. The air had shifted. And it wasn't just grief. It was something colder, more deliberate, like I had been quietly edited out of the narrative while everyone else was handed a new script. Have you ever stood in your own home and felt like a guest? That was the beginning. The email came 2 days later. Subject: Estate Administration, meeting scheduled. Not from Rebecca, from her assistant. No greeting ... no sentiment. Just a time and a location. -1, 9 a.m. downtown. Might as well have been a dentist appointment. No hope you're okay. No thinking of you. Just sterile logistics. That morning, I nearly didn't go. I pulled over twice on the way, thinking of turning back, but I didn't. The building was sleek and smelled of eucalyptus and toner. The receptionist looked me over like I didn't belong. I smoothed my coat and followed her to the conference room. 7 people sat around the table in charcoal suits. Rebecca was at the head, eyes locked on her folders. She didn't stand, didn't say hello, just gave a short nod toward the far seat. The only one not near the coffee. I sat, alone at the end. No one passed me a copy of the agenda. No one offered a pen. Rebecca cleared her throat. As executor of the estate, she began, I'll walk us through the asset distribution outlined in the finalized will. Her voice was clipped, efficient, like she was leading a quarterly budget review. I folded my hands in my lap. They were the only hands without a file. She read through accounts, holdings, properties. A winery stake I hadn't even known about. Then she said something that made me flinch. Patrick had transferred primary control of the trust to her 6 months ago. I blinked. That wasn't possible. He and I had managed that trust together for nearly 2 decades. He never mentioned giving it up, let alone to her. But Rebecca kept going, listing out allocations like inventory. Not once did she say my name, until an associate asked, what about Mrs. Sloane's portion? Rebecca didn't even look up. There are no distributions assigned to her under the current filing, she said. No emotion, no explanation, just legal whiteout. A heat crawled up my spine, but I didn't move. My hands stayed folded. I didn't speak. The silence in the room stretched thin, taut like a thread ready to snap. But no one broke it. They just moved on. When the meeting ended, I didn't rush out. I waited until every last person had gathered their folders and left. Rebecca lingered, slipping her papers into her briefcase one by one, slow and deliberate. She didn't look at me, didn't offer a word. It felt like she was waiting for me to speak. I didn't. I stood, adjusted my scarf, and walked out without turning around. Outside, the wind stung my cheeks, but I didn't cry, not even then. I didn't feel grief, not in the way people think. I felt hollow, like my life had been packed into a box and filed under someone else's name. She hadn't just claimed the legal control. She'd taken the story, the house, the legacy. She had filled the silence with her voice, and no one questioned it. As I walked to the garage, one sentence repeated in my mind. There are no distributions assigned to her. I wasn't a widow. I wasn't even a footnote. I was gone. Back home, I sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't want the lights on. The silence inside the house echoed louder than words. Patrick's things were still packed from the hospital. His cane leaned by the back door. I hadn't touched it. Couldn't. Later that night, I walked into his study. I didn't plan it. My body just moved. The drawer creaked open like it always had. He used to say it needed all. I used to say I liked the sound it meant he was home. Inside were receipts, old pencils, grocery lists, and at the very back, under a worn ledger, a small manila folder. No label, no date. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a handwritten note. Shaky penmanship, but unmistakably his. Just a few lines. Rebecca wants me to update the will. Says it's for clarity. She's drawing up papers. I haven't signed. I haven't told Marietta. She'd ask questions I don't want to answer. I read it over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. But it was clear. He had doubts. He hadn't signed. He hadn't told me. He'd felt something was wrong, but kept it to himself. The second page was a photocopy of a draft will, one I'd never seen. Rebecca had shown a different version in the meeting. This one had red circles, Margin notes, crossed out sentences. My name was in it. In the event of my passing, I leave my personal assets to my wife, Marietta Sloan. Crossed out, next to it, in red ink, discuss with Rebecca. The third page was a typed schedule. Legal consultations, meetings, to date stood out. Appointments made while Patrick was still going through treatment. Dates I hadn't known about. The only time he was ever alone was when Rebecca visited. The folder was thin, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I placed the pages on the desk and leaned back. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. I remembered our last conversation about the will. It had been a normal night, quiet. We were eating soup. He had said, "You won't have to worry about anything, Ma." I made sure of that. Even when it's messy, yes. The rest of the week passed in focused silence. Paperwork, phone calls, walks around the neighborhood where everything looked unchanged on the outside. But I knew better now. The most dangerous betrayals didn't arrive with screaming or slamming doors. They crept in through emails. Quiet edits, blank signature lines. By Thursday, Lydia had compiled enough to begin issuing subpoenas. She filed a request for Patrick's digital communications during the last 6 months of his life. She also requested a deposition of Rebecca's legal assistant, the one who had notarized the revised documents. Daniel noticed something in the files. 2 signature timestamps were off, both logged on Sunday nights when the office was supposed to be closed. Patrick hated working weekends, and he never signed anything without asking me to read it first. Those Sunday entries weren't just suspicious. They were out of character. I gave Lydia permission to bring in a handwriting expert. We'd compare Patrick's medical file signatures to the ones on the revised will. It wouldn't be definitive, but it could raise real doubts. That night, I didn't feel sad. I felt focused. For the first time in months, I felt the ground begin to shift under my feet, not collapse. Just move. Saturday morning, I drove to the cemetery. It was quiet. The sky hung low and silver. Patrick's headstone was simple. His full name, dates, a short phrase carved beneath. He lived with grace. He left with love. I stood there without speaking. I didn't need to. He couldn't hear me, but I let the moment settle anyway. I understood now he had trusted the wrong person. He had left too many things undone, but I didn't resent him for it anymore. I had spent too many nights wondering what he was thinking at the end, whether he had tried to protect me and failed. It didn't matter, because I was protecting what he couldn't. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Lydia. The assistant, her name was Ava, had agreed to speak. She would testify. She had kept notes. It was the crack we needed. Rebecca had tried to erase everything, but someone had been watching, and now someone was ready to speak. Tuesday morning arrived clear and cold, the kind of stillness that settles in before something changes. I arrived at Lydia's office early. The city hadn't fully woken up yet, and the sidewalks shimmered with frost. Inside the conference room, Daniel was already reviewing a thick stack of documents. Lydia stood near the window, phone to her ear, voice low and steady. On the table sat a small voice recorder, a legal notepad, and a cup of tea that had been poured for the witness. Ava Kendall walked in right on time. She looked younger than I'd expected, mid-30s. No makeup, no jewelry, dressed in a gray cardigan and jeans. But there was something in her posture. A quiet strength wrapped around a core of unease. She sat across from me. Lydia welcomed her and explained the rules of the deposition. Ava nodded without hesitation. She had already reviewed the documents. She had brought her own copies. She wasn't here for revenge. She just wanted the truth documented. She began with the timeline. Rebecca had pulled her into the estate revisions 6 weeks before Patrick's passing. She said the pace of the revisions struck her as too fast, too quiet. Normally, high-profile clients like Patrick had multiple review sessions, verified witnesses, proper notary steps, but this was different. She recounted a specific evening. It was late. She'd returned to the office to grab her jacket and saw Rebecca and another assistant in the conference room. A pile of unsigned documents sat on the table. Rebecca asked her to witness a signature Patrick's, but he wasn't there. When Ava asked where he was, Rebecca brushed it off. "He just stepped out," she had said. "It's urgent. Just witness it." No big deal. Ava hesitated that night. Long enough to write it down in her planner. She brought that planner with her. She turned it to a page and slid it across the table. 7:43 p.m. Sunday. Witness signature for Arnopi present. Lydia asked a few clarifying questions. Ava answered calmly. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter, but she had noticed too many inconsistencies. One of them was the formatting of the final will. It was different from the original. Rebecca had removed entire reference sections that would have required my counter-signature as co-trustee. Then Ava mentioned something else. She had overheard a call. Rebecca had been speaking quietly, but Ava caught enough. Phrases like liquidate silently and no delays. That call took place 2 days before Patrick was hospitalized for the final time. Ava looked down when she said it. She said she knew then something was wrong, but she also knew her place. Rebecca had influence, power, and Ava had bills to pay, a child to care for, and a job she couldn't afford to lose. But after hearing everything, she could no longer stay silent. She signed her statement, dated it. Lydia thanked her. Daniel walked her out. When the door closed behind her, Lydia sat down with both hands on the table. "This is it," she said. "It's not just suspicion now. We have a timeline, a witness, a paper trail. Enough to demand a formal examination of the entire trust process." Daniel nodded. Relief flickered in his expression for the first time. But I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because I knew what would come next. Rebecca would find out, and Rebecca wouldn't panic. She would prepare. 2 days later, it began. The letter arrived folded in thirds, crisp and cold. From her lawyer, of course not Rebecca herself. It accused me of interfering with a lawful estate transition, claimed I was acting out of grief, confusion, and personal resentment, threatened to pursue court costs if I didn't withdraw my motion within 10 business days. I read it 3 times, then I folded it neatly and set it beside my morning coffee. Then I picked up the phone and called Daniel. He asked if I was all right. I told him something I hadn't said out loud until then. "I've been quiet for years," I said. "But quiet isn't the same as surrender." Daniel chuckled softly. "Best thing I've heard all week." He replied. That afternoon, Lydia filed our rebuttal. It was comprehensive, included Ava's deposition, the metadata comparisons, Patrick's prior drafts, calendar logs from the office security system proving he hadn't entered the building the weekend the revised documents were supposedly signed. The file was heavy, not just in weight but in intent. We weren't speculating anymore. We weren't trying to undo something out of bitterness. We were restoring something that had been quietly stolen. That evening, I sat on the back porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Not angry, not broken, just clear. Rebecca had rewritten the story, but the ink was smudging now. And I still had the original manuscript. 2 days later, another envelope came, no return address, hand-delivered through my mail slot. Inside was an official-looking invitation from the Foundation's board. A meeting had been scheduled at their new office space to finalize the transition of executive oversight. No mention of the court filing. No mention of my contestation. Just business as usual. It was scheduled for Thursday, 2 p.m. I read it twice, then folded it and set it down next to my breakfast plate like it was nothing more than junk mail, but I knew better. This wasn't a courtesy. It was a stage. Rebecca wanted me there. She wanted me to see the seat she believed she had already claimed. I called Lydia, told her I planned to attend. Daniel hesitated. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I don't need to speak. I just need to be there." Thursday came. I arrived 5 minutes early. The new Foundation office was all glass and marble and whispered affluence. A receptionist escorted me into the boardroom. I recognized a few of the faces, old donors, former colleagues, men and women who had once clinked glasses in my dining room. They smiled polite, distant, but none asked where I'd been. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, navy blazer, white blouse, hair in a knot so tight it looked carved. When she saw me, her mouth twitched, surprise, annoyance. She blinked it away and returned to her script. The meeting began with updates, grants, budgets, strategic goals. Then came the line item, executive transition. Rebecca straightened and began to speak. She thanked the board for their trust, for their continuity, for believing in Patrick's vision. Then she said something that made my breath catch. "I'd like to thank Marietta as well," she said. "She stood beside Patrick during the early years, helped lay the groundwork for what we've built. Then came the dagger, and now, with her grace, I carry that legacy forward. Her grace, like I had bowed, like I had handed it over." I sat perfectly still. Then, without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. I slid it to the man seated beside me, Patrick's oldest friend still on the board. He looked at me, confused, then opened it. Inside was Ava's notarized statement, Lydia's legal summary, and a copy of the trust page Rebecca had altered marked in red ink. He didn't say a word. He simply passed it to the next person. And the next. Rebecca's smile faltered. Her hands stilled. But I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I let the documents do the talking. When they reached the end of the table, I stood. "Thank you for the invitation," I said. "My attorney will follow up should anyone here require clarification." And I left. No drama, no scene, just presence, undeniable and unshakable. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting in the sound of traffic and the late winter wind. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. But it felt like movement. That evening, Lydia called. She'd already heard from one of the board members. They were concerned. They wanted to delay the vote. A request was made to initiate an internal review before proceeding with any official authority transfers. Daniel said it best. That wasn't a confrontation, he told me. That was a redirection. Rebecca had expected me to fade away, to stay silent, to nod politely and disappear. She hadn't expected me to show up with the truth in my hand and pass it down the table like a torch. Over the next few days, the atmosphere changed. Not loudly, quietly. Emails slowed. Phone calls stopped. Rebecca's attorney went silent. The board postponed their vote, and a formal request was submitted for a third-party audit of the contested amendments. Even if no formal charges ever stuck, the doubt was there now. A stain she couldn't scrub out. And in that space, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: equilibrium. That Saturday, I pulled Patrick's old foundation files from the study. Notes on education grants, his original mentorship drafts, the first handwritten mission statement we ever wrote on a yellow legal pad at the kitchen table. I read through them slowly, then I boxed them up and called Daniel. I wanted them archived properly, not buried in legal folders, not attached to anyone's name, just preserved as history, as it was, not as someone else had tried to rewrite it. I ended the week with a walk by the lake near our old neighborhood. The air was cold but clean, the kind of cold that makes you feel more awake than tired. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to stand. And that was enough. The days after the board meeting were eerily still. No legal threats, no late-night emails, no glossy announcements with Rebecca's name in bold. It was as if the curtain had fallen, and the lights had dimmed, and no one was quite sure whether the show would resume. But I didn't mistake quiet for closure. Lydia warned me. When things go still, she said, people are regrouping. But this time, I wasn't the one who needed to prepare. I already had. I had done my part. I had told the truth. Now it was Rebecca's turn to live in it. I returned to my rhythms, small things. Reading the paper at the kitchen table, watering the rosemary by the window, making soup the way Patrick liked it: too much pepper, not enough salt. And I let go of the urge to chase explanations. Some betrayals never come with a why. But peace doesn't require an answer, only the decision to stop asking. Then came Sunday. Lydia called just after noon. She had received an email from Rebecca's legal team. It was short, formal, and entirely unexpected. There would be no further opposition to the trust investigation. In fact, Rebecca was stepping down. She would withdraw from her position as managing executive of the foundation, effective immediately. No admission of guilt, no apology, just a statement about preserving the foundation's reputation and honoring Patrick's legacy. I didn't cheer. I didn't even call Daniel. Instead, I stepped outside into the yard and let the cold wind hit my face. It felt honest, bracing, exactly what I needed. 2 days later, the foundation issued a press release. Short and understated, they confirmed the leadership transition and announced the formation of a temporary oversight committee. It would be made up of board members who had worked alongside Patrick in the early years. Daniel forwarded me a copy along with a brief handwritten note from one of them. It read, "You were right to protect what mattered." I held that note in my hands longer than I meant to. It didn't erase anything, didn't undo the pain. But it acknowledged something deeper than apology. That week, Lydia and I met for what might be the last time in person. She brought a final folder: documentation, summaries, potential next steps. If I wanted to pursue damages, restitution, legal remedy, there were options. She laid them out neatly without pressure. I thanked her, but I said no, not because I had forgiven Rebecca, but because I had already won the part that mattered most. I had reclaimed my name from a document that tried to erase it. I had placed myself back into a history I helped write, and more than anything, I had refused to shrink in the eyes of my own life. That night, I opened an old drawer in Patrick's desk. Inside were envelopes, his notes, a faded receipt from our anniversary dinner in Napa, and tucked between two worn ledgers was an envelope I didn't recognize. Unlabeled, sealed, I opened it slowly. Inside was an older copy of the will, dated a full year before Rebecca's version. In it, Patrick had detailed clear instructions about the foundation, about the trust, about my role as lifelong co-trustee. There were handwritten notes in the margins, references to conversations we'd had, places we'd traveled, jokes only we would understand. In the final paragraph, he had written something that made my throat close. No matter what happens, I want what we built to stay rooted in the values we shared. Family is not just blood. It is standing beside each other when no one else is watching. It was signed, in pen, no witnesses, just intention. I sat with that page in my lap as the room darkened. Then, in the morning, I brought it to Daniel. Asked him to archive it, not for court, not for leverage, but for memory, for truth. A few weeks later, I returned to the foundation building for the first time since the storm passed. It felt different now, less polished, less intimidating. Like the place had exhaled. The interim committee greeted me warmly. There were no speeches, no ceremony, just people who remembered what mattered. They asked if I would help review files for one of Patrick's early scholarship programs. I said yes, not because I needed a title, but because I knew the work, and I remembered why we started it. They didn't ask me to take on a role, and I didn't expect them to. That wasn't why I came. I wasn't there to reclaim a position. I was there to make sure the legacy didn't vanish beneath someone else's edits. I stayed for an hour, then walked out slowly, the winter sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I turned once at the curb and looked back at the glass-paneled building. It shimmered in the light, but it no longer had power over me. It was just a place, not the measure of who I was. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen and sat by the window with a cup of tea. I thought about Patrick, about Ava, brave in her quiet way, about Lydia and Daniel, who showed up not just with law degrees, but with integrity. And I thought about myself, not the woman who had sat silent at the reading of the will, but the woman who had risen, returned, rewritten the ending on her own terms. It had been a month since Rebecca's official withdrawal, and in that time, something inside me softened. No more phone calls, no legal firestorms, no documents waiting to be signed or contested, just stillness, and for the first time, it felt earned. Not empty, just enough. Mornings began slower. I stopped reaching for my planner before finishing my tea. I sat in the sunroom wrapped in Patrick's old blanket and let the light wash over the hardwood floors. That quiet wasn't the absence of chaos. It was the gift that followed surviving it. One afternoon, Lydia stopped by with a final envelope. It held closure copies of the court filings, recorded acknowledgments, the public record with my name restored. She handed it to me and didn't say much, just smiled. Then she stood, squeezed my hand, and left, I placed the envelope in the top drawer of Patrick's desk. Not locked away, just placed where it belonged. Next to his pencil, his old receipts, his steady convictions. That weekend, I walked through the community garden behind the center we had helped fund years ago. The ground was still hard from winter, but signs of spring peeked through tiny green shoots, early crocus pushing toward the light. The plaque was still there, a little weathered, still legible. In honor of those who plant for a future they may never see. And I knew it hadn't all been lost, just buried, just waiting. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, simple. It was from a young woman who had once received a scholarship from the foundation. She said she'd heard there had been changes. She didn't know the details, didn't need to. She just wanted me to know that the support she received years ago had changed the course of her life. Now, she worked at a local nonprofit, mentoring young girls from the same neighborhood she had grown up in. Her note was short, but it was everything, a quiet echo of the purpose Patrick and I had built together. Not fame, not legacy, just impact, passed forward. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and looked around the room. Same walls, same counter, same chip mug, but the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It held memory, and meaning, and peace. I hadn't burned anything down. I had simply refused to disappear. Spring came slowly that year. The daffodils in the garden bloomed first, then the soft pink tulips by the sidewalk outside the foundation. I didn't visit often, just enough to stay connected, just enough to remember. One morning, I received a cream-colored envelope in the mail, raised lettering, an invitation to the annual donor luncheon. Patrick and I had helped organize the very first one 2 decades ago. We hadn't attended in years. I almost didn't go, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer felt the need to prove anything. Still, I chose a soft gray suit that morning, pinned Patrick's old oak tree lapel pin to my collar. It used to be his favorite, small, silver, quiet. The ballroom hadn't changed. Polished floors, round tables, polite conversation over music. Rebecca wasn't there. Her name had quietly vanished from the printed program. In her place was a list of interim committee members and a new mission statement. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Near the end of the event, a young woman namely stepped onto the stage. New board member, new energy. She thanked everyone for their support during the transition. And then she paused. She looked directly at me, said my name not with pomp, not with performance, just warmth. She spoke briefly about the early days, about Patrick's vision, and about the quiet strength of those who stood beside that vision when it mattered most. The room turned toward me in gentle applause. I stood briefly and nodded, not for recognition, not for validation, just as a quiet acknowledgement, a small signal that the road I had walked was no longer invisible. It had a name now, mine. That night, I walked home alone, past the old bookstore where Patrick used to stop every Sunday. I smiled when I saw his favorite novel in the display window. Back in the kitchen, I brewed a cup of tea and opened the back door. The air was soft, clean. I stepped outside and looked up at the sky. It stretched wide above me, open and quiet. I was not erased. I was not a footnote in someone else's legacy. I was the author of my own ending, and finally, I was home.